I was really touched this morning by Dr. Deborah's presentation because it made me so aware on a very deep level of how much men and women suffer after abortion. Her stories are real, and it brings abortion down from a theory to an experience. And I've been asked today to share with you my experience of abortion and how did abortion affect my well-being. As I was preparing for this talk, I came across this quote. Unfortunately, I don't know who said it, but it is this. It was Aristotle who warned us that the reason we do not accept the truth, even when it is presented to us, is because we do not really want to know it. Knowing it would force us to change our ways. If we do not want to change our ways, we will invent a theory whereby we can live without truth. And when I read that, I realized that I experienced my post-abortion journey of healing as the reverse of that quote. After my abortion at the very young age of 15, it occurred. I had an abortion because I experienced date rape at the age of 15. The solution offered to me for that unexpected, unintended pregnancy was abortion. And I really was led into the theory that abortion was no big deal and that I could live with it and I could live with its consequences much better than I could live with a child. I know from experience that that is not true. I will recount for you the story. And you will notice as I go through the story that I will talk about the physical, the psychological, the spiritual, and the emotional after effects of abortion. When I made the phone call to that abortion center, I was reaching out for help. And I was very afraid. I was afraid of being pregnant. I was afraid of the way I would be treated by my peers, my family. I didn't trust the love of my family. So I was afraid. So abortion seemed like an easy solution. Afraid of not finishing school, of not finishing high school, let alone going on to post-secondary education. So I entered into that abortion decision thinking that it was a simple solution. I arrived at the abortion center that day, and I did sign a piece of paper saying that nobody would be responsible for the outcome. I had no idea what I was walking myself into. As I said, I was 15 years old, very naive, not very wise to the ways of the world. It was one of the most traumatic, if not the most traumatic events of my life. You can imagine how humiliating it is to put oneself in such a vulnerable position, physically, to be on a stretcher with one's feet in stirrups, and then to have a complete stranger violate one's body, to insert icy cold instruments into one's body, and to feel the pain of that child being dismembered. There was an incredible physical pain that I experienced. And I had a right-ordered response to the pain. I cried. But I also had a deeper right-ordered response, and that was to death. I instantly knew that I had crossed a line, and that something was happening that was beyond my power, beyond my authority, if you will. And I knew instantly when my child died. Nobody had to tell me anything. I was connected to this baby. I was 12 weeks gestation. And I just broke down. I was crying for the physical pain, but when that emotional, spiritual pain hit me, I wept from a place I didn't even know existed inside myself. And they tried to soothe me and say it'll be all over in a couple of minutes. But how untrue that was. Nothing about abortion was ever over for me in a couple of minutes. They gave me a sedative. It put me to sleep. I didn't want to wake up. I had no reason to live after that because I could not face the fact that a child had died and that that child was mine. As I boarded the bus to return to my hometown, I caught a glimpse of myself in the window of the bus as I got on the bus. And my response to that reflection of myself was, I hate you. You're never going to be able to fix this. You're never going to be able to bring back yesterday, if you will. It's like I had crossed this line, this event, abortion happened, but it was deeper than an event. It was a person. It was a child. And I was never going to be able to breathe life back into that child. And I had an instant hatred and self-loathing for myself. And I would go on from there to try and erase the facts and create a theory to live by. And that theory was being upheld by everyone around me. Abortion is a good thing. It's the best thing you could have done. And not many people knew about my experience. It was my well-kept secret. But there was a lot of conversation, as there still is in various places today, about abortion. And I would hear about it as something good, as the best thing you could have done, as a woman's right, as a choice. And so I was always in this conflict inside. Something inside of me said, it's wrong. It's never going to be right. But the world says it's okay. And so it's this conflict that drives me crazy, literally. And I try to solve the conflict in various ways. One of my first things was to change addresses. So I moved. Then I changed my job. I went from working in a family restaurant where I would meet families and children and babies. I didn't know what I was doing, to an all-night pizzeria where I met people of a different mentality, a different way of life. And then I would use alcohol to numb my pain, and then drugs, and then relationships. And they weren't really relationships, they were serial encounters. And I accumulated these serial encounters, hoping to have someone say to me, Angelina, you're forgiven, you're lovable. For someone to speak to that self-hatred and that self-loathing inside of me. But nothing worked. I tried the geographical cure. I finished high school, went on to college, the farthest away from home that I could get, because all my relationships were reminding me of the abortion. I graduated from college, worked for a year, traveled Europe, always running inside from this I want to say this thing that haunted me, and I could never resolve it. And finally, I went back to university with the intention of becoming a teacher. And I really had a hidden agenda. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was going to major in psychology to try and figure out what was wrong with me. And after one semester of first Psych 101, I concluded that I was really a basket case and that I wasn't going to be able to fix myself. So I made an appointment to go to a therapist on campus. And I remember saying some of my story, and I was suffering from depression. And I didn't like the way I was living, the use of sex, drugs, and alcohol it was so contrary to who I really was deep inside. I didn't like my lifestyle. I didn't like looking in the mirror and hating the girl that I saw. So I thought maybe if I go to a therapist, they will help me. And at some point in the conversation with the therapist, I said I had an abortion. And my words, it was like the word abortion went across the room, did not land, and returned to me. And I instantly knew that I would get no help. And that was a horrible feeling, because now I was desperate. And I started to be plagued with the idea of suicide. Because if I can't help myself, and nobody else can help me, then what's to become of me? And this idea of suicide was just another way of trying to escape this social, relational, emotional, spiritual pain inside of me. Fortunately for me, I didn't act on that ideation. I happened to turn the TV on one evening, and there was a program on that offered a helpline, and I made a phone call that turned me away from that road. It actually helped me tremendously. I was able to straighten out my line, and I managed to finish the semester, passing all my grades, and I really was turning my life around, breaking with some of my patterns, moving away from serial sexual encounters and away from the drugs and the alcohol. Shortly thereafter, I met my husband, now my husband, and we got married, and I thought everything was behind me until the whole notion of children came up. And that was very frightening to me. Now, I want you to know that this was all going on at a subconscious level. I was not conscious of what I was doing. The reason I can tell this story is because of the healing journey I've been on, gathering up the story, gathering up the pieces of my life. And I've been given insight and wisdom about my own behavior. So I began to develop other coping mechanisms for this unresolved abortion in my life. And ultimately, what wasn't resolved is the grief that is attached to a loss. This child was a child who I lost. And I had never grieved that child. I'd never personalized that child, named the child, gone through any of my story with anyone. So I get married, and now I'm in what is known as experiencing abortion connectors. So the marital embrace, the prospect of that kind of intimacy, and that kind of intimacy leading to a child, was just more than I could bear. And how did I cope with that? Well, I became a workaholic. I lived on coffee and cigarettes, working in a position of responsibility, justifying my absence from home. Sometimes I would even stay overnight. I was working in a residential setting, serving the people with developmental handicaps. And I would just go to the nth degree to help. This was all part of a bargaining process that I was in with myself, making up for what I believed I had done that was what I believed was wrong. And so, as I'm acting this out, living on coffee and cigarettes, wasting away, I become very ill. And going to the doctor time and again and asking, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And eventually the diagnosis that I was given is that you have a full generalized infection throughout your whole body, and we don't know why. There's no explanation. Well, I knew what it was about, but I wasn't going to tell anybody. And at some level in my being, I believed that I should suffer for what I had done. I had this constant awareness that it was wrong. Well, I got involved in the pro-life movement. And one of my most helpful experiences was seeing a fetal model. And I was able to see for the first time that what I did, it truly was wrong. And that's what Aristotle says. It's the truth. And it was the truth that set me free. Seeing the truth. Well, we were 7 years married when one day I'm rushed to the hospital for an emergency ultrasound. I can't walk because of the abdominal pain. It turns out that I'm experiencing an ectopic pregnancy. The tube had ruptured and my life was hanging in the balance. It really is incredible that I'm still here to tell the tale. I was bleeding internally for 3 days. And that day in the hospital, I was not treated as a code blue. I spent 18 hours in the hospital, and then was taken into emergency surgery. And as I was being wheeled into emerge, into that OR, I had a flashback. And it was the first time since the day of the abortion that I was in a situation like the abortion. And all of a sudden, it all came back. And I had a very healing experience. As I was being wheeled into OR, I said, stop, I can't do this. This is too much like abortion. I need to know if this child is alive or dead. The doctor said to me, most likely, the child is dead. But we can't guarantee that. Well, for me, the world stopped. There was no way that I was going to give the consent needed to take the life of this child. I couldn't do it. The doctor said, you'll die if you don't have this surgery. And what happened in my heart was, so be it. I would rather die than take the life of my child. And that was such a healing moment for me. And it was also healing because there was a healing of my will. The other came before self. But it was also healing because on the day of the abortion, I wanted to say, stop, don't do that. And I didn't have the courage to interrupt the abortion. It was the loss of our son, Joseph Michael Steenstra, through ectopic pregnancy. He was about 8-9 weeks gestation, that broke open for me the unresolved grief of the abortion experience that I went through at the age of 15. And as I grieved Joseph, I began to find the courage to face the questions. Was it a boy? Was it a girl? How old would that child be now? Would that child forgive me for taking their life? Forgiving the consent for their life to be taken. And that was one of the hardest steps in the journey of healing, was to imagine myself looking into my child's eyes and saying, please forgive Mommy for taking your life. And when I experienced that there was no judgment, no condemnation, when I experienced that forgiveness, I could forgive myself. And it's not been an easy journey, but I can tell you it's been worth it. For the joy that I know now, for the liberation that I know now, it's been worth every yes to the pain of the journey that has brought me thus far. It's not an easy journey, but it's one worth taking. And as Dr. Zenny said this morning, it's one that I was able to take because of all of those who have loved me and stood by me and journeyed with me. And so I thank you for being here. And my hope is that you, each of you, will be that person for some man or woman who is on the journey or who is yet to begin the journey to take their first step. And I hope that what you hear here today will be of some help to kind of see abortion and its aftermath, and that my story will give a face for abortion. It's not a theory, it's really an experience. Thank you very much.